this is Marty from Dog's Blog with a noontime report of the Frank Carson et al. Trial on December 19, 2018. Court was scheduled to start at 9 a.m., started around 9:16. There was a juror late, and so the jury was late coming up. They were looking at some, prior to the jury coming up, they were looking at some pictures of some guns that were going to be testified about by Steve Jacobson. These pictures have been looked at before, and I don't know why there's a contention about this. There's a .22 caliber rifle, a barrel, two barrels, one with a trigger guard. They were not attached to any type of stock or anything. And there was a picture of a .32 caliber pistol that was taken from Baljeet Atwal's house that he said was his brother's. That was brother Daljit's. They were talking about in regards to the statements that made to Steve Jacobson. These pictures were taken and the guns were taken in a search warrant at Bobby Atwal's house, and Steve Jacobson interviewed Baljeet Atwal at the residence during the search warrant. He was in the car. He was cuffed, put in a car, and he was dressed in his underwear at the time. Jai Gohil argued there's unknown relevance. There's plenty of evidence of guns in testimony already. He didn't know how this added any value to it. And Steve Jacobson was not part of the search at the house. Marlisa Ferreira said it's relevant due to the Faye Springer testimony that holes could have been made by many caliber weapons, and they're talking about the holes in the jacket and such that they thought were just .22 caliber, but it was she said it could have been up to a 40 or 45 caliber that could have made those holes. The gun that found at Baljeet's house was a .32 caliber. It was in again at Baljeet's house, but it's Daljeet's gun. Also talked about the Quintanar testimony when he talked about an ankle holster that Daljeet Atwal had showed him, and then he said, and Robert Woody said it was a handgun that killed Corey Kaufman. She's saying that the jury should know that Daljeet Atwal had a .32 caliber handgun. Attorney Hahn said these statements have already been litigated. They have, but the DA brings them up and the judge goes through them again. Marlisa Ferreira has no evidence as it was the homicide, the device used in the homicide, meaning the gun. Now, Marlisa Ferreira's argument of the holsters and the guns, and he says there's no added evidence or evidentiary value to all this information now. Judge Uniga, who says she can't recall how the gun was found. She can't seem to remember much of anything anymore. And the gun was found during a search warrant of Baljeet Atwal's house in July of 2015, I believe it was. Marlisa Ferreira said that the search warrant was done at Baljeet Atwal's residence. He was taken outside and he talked to Steve Jacobson. He was flex cuffed by somebody from the sheriff's department, probably a SWAT team member. He was still in his underwear, and he was placed in the back of a car that he could not, and Steve Jacobs admitted that he was not able to leave. He was locked in the back seat. He had told Baljeet Atwal had told officers there was guns in the house because they were asking for their safety. Marlisa Ferreira was kind of unsure if Steve Jacobson allowed any specific questions in regards to the firearms. And again, she said the .32 caliber was testified by Kurt Bunch, and there was a line of questioning that apparently went on with Steve Jacobson, asking him when he was reading the search warrant to him, and evolved into a line of questioning. Judge Uniga noted that how the information was obtained is relevant to the Miranda procedures. Attorney Hahn says Attorney Hahn said this conversation with Steve Jacobson was in a police vehicle. He was in the back seat, unlocked, behind the locked door. And Steve Jacobson was asking about any weapons in the home. So Judge Iniga said he needed a 402 hearing. That's an evidentiary hearing in regards to Steve Jacobson's testimony and the search warrant and the statements that were made in the car. So at this time, Steve Jacobson was put on the back burner for now, and Detective David Hickman was called to the stand. On set, and Marlissa Ferrer, the jury was called up at 9:34. Marlissa Ferrer asked him about 7:10 or 15 if he went to Scott McFarland's house to do a search warrant, and if some items were seized. And it was evidence number 729. It was a rifle, 2 rifle barrels. I don't believe there was a stock. One was a barrel with a trigger guard. One was a Winchester, one was a Marlin. And it was taken to Stanislaus County Sheriff's Office and booked as evidence. She had no further questions. Jai Gohel asked if the search warrant occurred on July 10th of 2015, and the witness, who is Detective David Hickman, he was a designated finder. Now, what does that mean? Is that somebody that's a designated finder, you could have a team of officers, say 5 or 6 officers, go through a house. They find something of evidentiary value. They turn it over to the finder, which was Detective Hickman, and he's the one that can testify it in court. As he'll be shown, they'll show him where they found it, or not even pick it up. Sometimes just leave it there, and he'll pick it up and be the finder. So you don't have all these officers subpoenaed into court at once. He was aware also that it was a CHP home that was being searched, and it was the date of the search was again 7/10 of 2015. It was 3 years after the disappearance of Corey Kaufman. So at this time, he was done. There was no further questions by anybody. Sergeant Roy Johnson from the Sheriff's Office was called to the stand. He's a classification officer at the time at the downtown jail when they had custodies there. And Marlissa Ferrer started direct on him. In 2015, he worked classification and to identify and classify inmates, and he said yes, he had Daljeet and Baljeet Outlaw there. And they were classed. They were housed at the downtown jail at that time. They were housed in cell P7, I believe he said, and then South Single. They were moved to a South Single, and over by where Victor Navarre was housed, and they were housed by him for 10 days in October of 2016, from October 3rd to October 13th of 2016. The Outlaws were there for a long time on the same tier, but then were moved to the cell right next to Victor Navarre. I'm sorry, it's not Frank Navarre, it's Victor Navarre. He was in cell single number 8. They were in number 9. Navarre also had somebody by the name of Richard Garcia as his cellmate. During the time in jail with Navarre, 2015 to 2018, and talking about that's when the officer had been working over there. She asked him if he'd been present or inmates known to make pruno. There was an objection. Long sidebar. We had several long sidebars this morning. Apparently it was quite an issue. I don't know what it is. The judge sent all the attorneys out of the courtroom and the witness out of the courtroom, and I don't know if they needed to ask the witness a question or if they were just conferring, because Marlissa Ferrer and everybody went in the courtroom. We're all just sitting there, including the juries, just sitting in the courtroom. It was kind of strange the way it was done. It sounded like the attorneys were having a little bit of a strong disagreement on this thing. So they came back in 5 minutes later, and Marlissa Ferrer had withdrawn the question. So she went on to say the cells were next door to the Outlaw brothers were in the same cell next door in Navarre, and this gentleman by the name of Garcia. So they had always been on the same tier all along, but they were moved just during that 10-day period right next door to Victor Navarre. She also asked about kites. That's a request for movement or something. Request for something is put in. It's also a kite. It's also something that is put on a string. They'll roll up toilet paper or something to send notes between cells to each other. Also, he said that's a real common event in the jail. I just realized I had my recorder off. I'm going to go back one paragraph just in case and see what I screwed up. Jai Gohel said the Outlaws entered the jail at August 14th of 2015, released 12/22/16. They were in custody approximately 490 days. I said that was right about where my count was that they were in custody when I was doing the count in the prelim. 10-day period, they were housed next to, just that 10-day period, they're housed next to Navarre. There was a solid wall between cells. They cannot see into the cells, but can communicate through the front of the cell where the bars are. The bunk beds all butt up against each other in the same wall. And there's also a desk up against the wall in the back. Marlissa Ferrer went back on direct and says the air vents there are air vents in the back of the cells which come from a common air tube and information, and they can talk between those through the vents, and information can be passed between the cells. Again, Navarre was there prior to the Outlaws being taken in custody. Percy Martinez did a cross talking about in July of 2016 they were in two-person cells. There was two people only in those cells, even though and there's the tier itself has a 20-person capacity, so they weren't overcrowded or anything like that. The officer couldn't remember the number of TVs on the tier, but there were multiple, and the TVs would be loud. But again, he said they would, out of respect, the inmates would turn them down or mute them when officers walked onto the tier. The TVs were mounted to the walkways across from the cells. There was not a lot of movement on the tier. At this time, the jury went out at 10:40 a.m. and we took a break, and they came back up at 11:02 a.m. Percy Martinez was still going at the units. I'm talking about the vents in the back of the cell, and the vents go out to the back of the cell into a maintenance or utility area behind him, and there's also a second vent down below that he wasn't sure what it was for. The vents are not always on, is what he said. Attorney Hans asked if Richard Garcia, who is AKA, also known as Fox on a street name, that's a moniker, and Navarre had a moniker of Animal. Jai Gohel went on cross, talking about the walkway down the middle of the cells and the TVs attached to the wall, which was again the cinder block wall, and talked about the distances and stuff like that. But the officer didn't really know what the distances were, and he said he didn't really want to guess. Marlissa Ferrer went back on redirect and asked him if the inmates were able to converse between cells, and he said they are, and they saw the TVs that were always on, but they did get shut off sometime during the night. So again, Percy Martinez went on cross, says the TVs were muted to do business on the tier, and he never saw cells 8 and 9 yelling at each other, but did see them talking. So there was never any type of altercation or anything like that, but they did do some talking. Attorney Hans again asked, is it easier to converse with the TVs off? And he said, yes, of course, and there's no further questions. So that was all they had of Sergeant Johnson. They had another sidebar. The jury was then sent out for the day, 11:21 a.m. The jury was sent out. So that gives them about 80 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes total of jury time in the courtroom today. They decided to have the 402 hearing in regard to Steve Jacobson and the statement about the guns. Steve Jacobson did take the stand, and Marvelisa Ferrer was talking about Steve Jacobson was there at the search warrant at Baljeet Atwal's house on July 10th of 2015. Baljeet Atwal was put in a police vehicle in his underwear. He had been already flex cuffed, and he was complaining about the cuffs being too tight. He did cut the cuffs off and turned on the heater in the car to make him comfortable. The SWAT team was setting up on the house, and he asked him if anybody had talked to him, mostly the SWAT people. And Baljeet had said no one else was home because his wife and 3 kids had already been taken out of the house. He got some general information like phone numbers for the cell in the home. He remandized Baljeet Atwal and went over the search warrant, started reading the search warrant and what they were doing and what they were looking for. And they were looking for knives and guns. And he said he had already told SWAT that he knew where the guns were. He's responded to Steve Jacobson's question and said there was a .22 caliber handgun that was there in kitchen on top of the fridge. Judge Aniga needed to clarification something, and she was looking at the record of the real time, and then decided that she needs to listen to the audio. And Steve Jacobson had said on the stand he was not sure if he had said .22 caliber or .32 caliber, but they were. He went back and listened to the audio again. He said it was not sure which one it said it was, but he thinks it was a .32 caliber, not a .22 caliber that he was talking about. Attorney Hans wanted to ask a question, and that's why Judge Aniga wants to re-listen to the audios to see what it's actually said. Hans said at the scene of the search warrant, officers walked Baljeet Atwal to Steve Jacobson. Baljeet Atwal was flex cuffed. He was put in a car. He was not free to leave. He was locked in the backseat of the car. The issue of the search warrant was for firearms, as he read him the search warrant in regard to that. He never said he had any questions. He just read the search warrant. Baljeet Atwal made a mention of a gun, and Steve Jacobson responded with more questions. Marlisa Ferrer stated that she had the audio and a transcript she was printing out for the judge, and then she had the audio queued up. It's too long to play now, as they were shutting the court down for 11:45 today, shutting it down for the day. And so she's going to listen to it later. The jury will be called to come in later on Friday. There's no court tomorrow. And the jury is back on Friday. So at this point, the judge had that familiar, confused look on her face. She was trying to make a decision, trying to decide something. She wasn't clear about what she wanted to do. It was obvious. And so finally she says they'll tell the jury to come in late. And, it'll be late Friday. And they'll finish this up and listen to these recordings as they're too long to listen to now. That was it. We were done for the day. Not much happened. There was talk today about possibly Robert Woody getting on the stand Friday, But there's no confirmation of that. I seriously doubt that they're going to put him on for one day and then have the long holiday break. And I think there's other witnesses that she wants to call anyway. So, but that's the way it stands right now. There's no court this afternoon, no court tomorrow. There'll be court Friday, and then there's no court for 17 days during the holiday break. So remember, no podcast tonight.